Hi, in this video we will read about the management of diabetic ketoacidosis from AIMS PICU protocol. Let's start. Most children with the DKA require admission. Children who are alert and have no clinical dehydration and no vomiting can be managed with the oral dehydration and subcutaneous insulin, but do require stringent monitoring to ensure that they are improving and the ketone levels are falling. Emergency assessment should follow the general guidelines for the pediatric advanced life support PALS. Initial resuscitation should be followed by frequent clinical and biochemical monitoring. The goals of the therapy in the DKA include: what are the goals for the therapy? Correction of dehydration and acidosis. These are the goals of therapy in DKA. Gradual restoration of the euglycemia, avoiding the complications of therapy, especially avoiding cerebral edema. Identification and elimination of the precipitating causes and prevention of the recurrent episodes. The management of the DKA can be discussed under the following headings. First one is the initial assessment and resuscitation. Let's start. A diagnosis of DKA is made when the blood glucose concentration is more than 200 mg per deciliter, pH is less than 7.3, and a serum bicarbonate level is less than 15 milliequivalents per liter, and there is ketonemia. So ketonemia can be measured at the bedside using the blood ketone measuring strips, which are more expensive than the glucometer strips. If rapid tests for the detection of ketones in the blood are not available, detection of the urine ketones by dipstick is generally used as a surrogate marker. Hospitalization is indicated in all cases except those with the mild acidosis, no dehydration, and preserved ability to take fluids orally. Indications for the admission to the intensive care unit include the presence of severe decay or risk factors for the cerebral edema, such as age less than 5 years, new onset diabetes, severe DKA, and compromised circulation and altered sensorium. So these are all what? These are the risk factors for cerebral edema which require ICU admission. Okay. Risk factor for cerebral edema are age of less than 5 years, new onset diabetes, severe decay, compromised circulation, and an altered sensorium. A decay is a medical emergency. A quick general physical examination is done to ascertain the status of airway, breathing, and circulation and need for any resuscitation. In patients with the impaired consciousness, the airway needs to be secured. Endotracheal intubation and the nasogastric tube placement to empty the gastric contents are required if the GCS score is below 8. Fine. So what we read, uh, in patients with the impaired consciousness, airway needs to be secured, and endotracheal intubation and nasogastric tube placement to empty the gastric contents are required if the GCS score is below 8. Okay. Adequate oxygenation should be maintained. For children presenting with hypotension, immediate fluid resuscitation is carried out. Fine. With 10 to 20 ml per kg of 0.9% normal saline bolus given rapidly. For children presenting with hypotension, okay, for those we need to give the fluid bolus. Who are presenting with hypotension, we need to give immediate fluid resuscitation is carried out with 10 to 20 ml per kg of 0.9% normal saline given rapidly. Two large bore peripheral IV lines are secured, of which one should preferably be kept heparin locked to allow easy, painless, repetitive blood sampling. Bladder catheterization is generally not required unless the child is unconscious or unable to void on demand. If pre-morbid weight is known, current weight helps estimate the degree of dehydration. Signs on the physical examination are often inaccurate in estimating the severity of dehydration in these children, due to the hyperosmolality, intravascular volume is preserved at the expense of the intracellular dehydration. The signs of dehydration in the young children include prolonged capillary refill time, abnormal skin turgor, and dry oral cavity, sunken eyes and absent ears, and cool extremities. So these are the signs of what? Signs of dehydration in young children. Prolonged capillary time, abnormal skin turgor and dry oral cavity, sunken eyes, absenteeism, and cool extremities. However, as the reliability of these signs in predicting the extent of dehydration is not very good in DKA, treatment is planned according to the severity of DKA, assuming 3 to 5%, 5 to 7%, and 7 to 10% dehydration in those with mild, moderate, and severe DKA, respectively. Okay, assuming this is the severity percentage. One should also look for the signs of the raised intracranial tension and infection. For patients with the fever or any obvious focus of infection, antibiotics should be initiated after obtaining appropriate cultures. Now coming to the biochemical assessment. While obtaining the intravenous excess, blood samples are collected for serum glucose, sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, phosphate, venous blood gas, blood urea, creatinine, hematocrit, total and different leukocyte counts, and serum osmolality. When the facilities for measurement of the blood ketones are not available routinely, urine can be easily examined for the ketones by dipstick. If the serum potassium levels are not immediately available, careful interpretation of the baseline ECG can give a quick idea about the significant hypokalemia or hyperkalemia. Fine. Elevation of the blood urea nitrogen and hematocrit correlate with the degree of dehydration. Although the total body potassium is decreased, serum levels at the presentation may be normal or high due to the redistribution in response to acidosis and insulin deficiency. Okay. Serum sodium is unreliable as an indicator of degree of extracellular fluid contraction because glucose in the ECF brings about the osmotic movement of the water, causing the dilutional hyponatremia. The corrected sodium in the anion gap and osmolality should be calculated using the formula suggested in the table 5. In DKA, the anion gap is usually between 20 to 30 millimole. Elevation of the anion gap to values more than 35 millimole per liter suggests coexisting lactic acidosis. The calculated effective serum osmolality in the DKA is between 300 to 350 milliosmol per liter. This is the calculation for corrected corrected sodium anion gap and calculated osmolality. Leukocytosis with increase in the immature cell is common in the decay due to the effect of the cytokines and catecholamines and may not necessarily indicate an underlying infection. Fine, leukocytosis is what? Immature cells is common in the decay due to the effect of the cytokines and catecholamines की वजह से. Why the leukocytosis is happening? Because of the cytokines and catecholamines and may not necessarily indicate any infection. Appropriate cultures are sent before starting the antibiotics if there is a suspicion of infection. Computed tomography or the MRI scan of the head to evaluate for the cerebral edema or the other underlying cause is planned. If the child has altered sensorium or the clinical examination is suggestive of the raised intracranial tension, estimation of the HbA1c level can help in the confirmation of the diagnosis of DKA. In patients with a newly diagnosed diabetes, and an assessment of the glycemic control in those with established diabetes. Fluid replacement should always begin about 1 to 2 hours before starting the insulin therapy to prevent the cerebral edema. Fine. So, which headings we already discussed? We started with initial assessment and resuscitation. Okay. Then we read about the biochemical assessment, and the third thing that we are going to start about is the fluid replacement now. First is the calculation of the fluid deficit. Fluid requirements are calculated presuming a deficit of 30 to 50 ml per kg in mild, 50 to 70 ml per kg in moderate, and 70 to 100 ml per kg in severe DKA. Okay, this is just the that percentage that we read, right? 3 to 5% dehydration we read, right? In mild DKA, 5 to 7% in moderate DKA, and 7 to 10% in the severe DKA. All the IV or the oral fluids given prior to the presentation must be factored into fluid calculation. Wherever possible, the patient's actual weight on the admission should be used for the fluid calculation rather than the estimated weight or approximation. Now coming to This is all about the calculation of fluid deficit. Now coming to the fluid therapy in the first hour. For all the patients with the DKA, volume replacement begin with the NS. In mild to moderate DKA, 10 ml per kg is administered over 1 hour, while in those with the severe DKA but no shock. In case of severe DKA but no shock, 20 ml per kg over 30 to 60 minutes is administered. In rare patients with the DKA who presents in shock, the management is like any other case of hypovolemic shock with a rapid 20 ml per kg NS boluses and assessment of the circulation after each bolus. Okay. Now coming to subsequent fluid management, it is recommended that the solution that has a tonicity range of 0.45% to 9% saline with added potassium or the ringer lactate to be used in the initial 4 to 6 hours of management. 0.45% to 0.9% saline with initial for initial 4 to 6 hours of management based on the patient's hydration status, corrected serum sodium concentration and osmolality. Subsequently, as the blood glucose approaches 300 mg per deciliter or earlier, if the fall in the blood glucose is precipitous, that is, fall of more than 90 mg per deciliter per hour, fluid containing 5% dextrose with a tonicity between 0.5% normal saline to 0.9% saline should be used. This one is the first one. However, if the corrected serum sodium is low and not rising with the fall in the blood glucose, we need to check for the corrected serum sodium also. Okay, if it is not rising with the fall in the blood glucose, NS can be used for the subsequent fluid replacement. Fine. So we need to check for the corrected sodium. A randomized trial that studied 1,389 episodes of the DK in 1,255 children treated with either 0.545% or 0.9% saline administered rapidly or slowly found no significant difference in frequency of other mental status, cerebral edema, or neurocognitive outcomes in any of the treatment arms. Now coming to the replacement of urinary losses. Replacement of urinary losses is not warranted as the initial rehydration lowers the blood glucose levels and hence normalizes the urine output by decreasing the osmotic diuresis. Now coming to the monitoring. Fluid therapy should be guided by the frequent clinical assessment and regular calculation of the effective osmolality and corrected sodium. Fine. Fluid therapy is guided by what? Guided by clinical assessment and regular calculation of effective osmolality and corrected sodium. Overzealous fluid resuscitation that leads to rapid change in the corrected sodium and effective osmolality is associated with the development of cerebral edema. So we don't have to overzealously resuscitate. Fluid resuscitation. Okay. Overzealous fluid resuscitation leads to what? Rapid change in the corrected sodium of more than 1 to 2 milliequivalents per hour and effective osmolality. This is associated with the development of cerebral edema if there is rapid changes in the uh, serum osmolality. Now coming to the pediatric intensive care, flu, sorry, rate of the fluid administration. The sum of the calculated fluid deficit and the maintenance fluid should be administered over 24 to 48 hours at an infusion rate not exceeding 1.5 to 2 times the daily maintenance requirements. The fluid administered in the first hour should be subtracted from the calculated fluid, except where the child had presented in the shock and required initial rapid fluid boluses for resuscitation. Example of the fluid calculation for a boy weighing 20 kg with a severe decay, assuming 10% dehydration, who received 20 ml per kg of 0.9% saline in the first hour. So the maintenance fluid required for 36 hours is 1500 plus 750 of 2250 ml. Fluid deficit is by 10 by 100 ml per kg, it will be 2000 ml. Subtracting the fluid given over the first hour at the rate of 20 ml per kg, it will be 400 ml. So the total fluid will be maintenance fluid, which is this one, and the fluid deficit we calculated by dehydration is this one minus the fluid in the first hour. So the fluid administration rate will be 110 ml per hour. Except for severely ill individual, oral intake typically begins within 24 hours, and this should be taken into account and deducted from the IV fluids. After resolution of the acidosis, the patients are transitioned to subcutaneous insulin, and the remaining fluid deficits are replenished by the oral intake. Now, coming to the insulin therapy. Insulin therapy is essential to reverse the metabolic derangements. This one is the fourth heading that we are going to read about is the insulin therapy. It reverses the metabolic derangements like the lipolysis, ketogenesis, and helps to normalize the blood glucose. First one is the timing. The insulin therapy started 1 to 2 hours after starting the fluid replacement. Okay. Although rapid-acting subcutaneously administered insulin such as the Lispro and the Aspart are demonstrated to be effective, IV regular insulin is preferred for the management of DKA in children. What is preferred? Regular insulin. But these short-acting also are effective. As Lispro and Aspart are also effective. Now coming to the bolus doses. Insulin should never be given in the management. Bolus doses of insulin should never be given in the management of DKA as it may predispose to the development of cerebral edema due to the rapid fall in the osmolarity and hypokalemia due to the transcellular potassium shift. So what should be the dose? Low dose IV insulin therapy at 0.05 to 1 unit per kg per hour is the standard of the care, with the most patient responding well to the lower dose of 0.05 unit per kg with the lower incidence of complication. So we should start at this dose of 0.05 unit per kg. BSPET working group recommends a starting insulin dose of this 0.05 units per kg per hour except in the severe DKA or in adolescents. Higher doses are associated with increased risk of hypokalemia. Higher doses of insulin are associated with increased risk of what? Hypokalemia, hypoglycemia, and too rapid decline in the serum osmolality. Preparation: 40 units of regular insulin is preferably diluted in a volume of 39 ml NS to give a standard insulin concentration of 1 unit per ml. Now, priming of tube needs to be done. As the insulin binds to the glass bottles, plastic IV bags, syringes, and the tubing, priming of the tube must be performed prior to starting the infusion by flushing the insulin solution through the tubing before connecting it to the patient. Duration of the therapy. The dose of insulin should usually remain at 0.05 to unit per kg per hour at least until the resolution of DKA, pH of more than 7.3 and bicarbonate more than 15 and BOHB less than 1 millimole per liter, which usually takes longer than that taken for the normalization of the blood glucose concentration. However, if there is hypokalemia, hypoglycemia, insulin dose can be reduced gradually provided there is steady resolution of acidosis. So, when we need to decrease the dose of insulin, if there is hypokalemia or hypoglycemia. Dose adjustment. Following the institution of insulin infusion, blood glucose usually falls at the rate of 36 to 90 mg per deciliter per hour after the insulin infusion starts. Since the blood glucose normalization occurs earlier than the resolution of ketoacidosis, the concentration of the dextrose in the replacement fluid should gradually increase, as required to maintain the blood glucose between 150 to 200 milligram per deciliter. If hypoglycemia occurs despite reaching a strength of 12.5% dextrose solution, the dose of the insulin may be reduced in decrements of 0.01 to 0.02 units per kg per hour, provided that the metabolic acidosis continues to resolve. Fine. So, to prevent hypoglycemia, we can change the IV fluid to 5% dextrose, 7% dextrose, 10% dextrose, and if even after going up to 12.5% dextrose, there is still hypoglycemia. There is hypoglycemia even after reaching a strength of 12.5% dextrose. Then we have to think about reducing the insulin dose, and it can be reduced decrements in 0.01 to 0.02 units per kg per hour, provided the metabolic acidosis is still resolving. Young children with the DKA, older children with the established DKA, and those with the non ketotic hyperosmolar states are usually sensitive to insulin. Insulin resistance is suspected if the rate of fall of blood glucose is less than 70 mg per deciliter per hour. When is insulin resistance suspected? If the blood glucose fall is less than 70 mg per deciliter per hour or acidosis is not improving even though the blood glucose is falling. Possible underlying reasons include incorrectly made insulin infusion, inadequate fluid resuscitation, fluid calculation error, or coexisting sepsis. After ruling out these causes, the rate of the infusion can be increased gradually to zero point 0.3 units per kg per hour. Now coming to the clearance of urinary ketones. Clearance of the urinary ketones is not an endpoint for the therapy with the IV insulin, and as the dipsticks mainly detect the acetoacetate, dipsticks detect what? Mainly detect the acetoacetate, which persists for a longer time as normalization of ketosis is associated with return of elevated beta hydroxybutyrate to acetoacetate ratio from up to 10 is to 1 to 1 is to 1. This is important thing to remember. Okay. Normalization of the ketosis associated with the return of this elevated beta hydroxybutyrate to ratio from 10 is to 1 to 1 is to 1. When this ratio reaches 1 is to 1, then we consider it as the normalization of ketosis. But the dipstick that we use mainly detects what? It mainly detects the acetoacetate, which persists for a longer time. So the acidifying effect of the chloride can mask the recognition of resolution of ketoacidosis when the total base deficit is used to monitor the biochemical improvement. Measurement of the bedside blood beta hydroxybutyrate level, if available, will help unambiguously demonstrating the resolution of ketoacidosis. So, what should be measured to demonstrate the resolution of ketoacidosis? We should be able to measure beta hydroxybutyrate levels. They help to measure the resolution of ketoacidosis. If the infusion pump is not available, if the in patients with the uncomplicated non-severe DKA, hourly or 2 hourly subcutaneous intramuscular injection, subcutaneous or IM injection of the short or rapid-acting insulin analog, insulin Lispro or insulin Aspart, is safe and may be effective as IV regular insulin infusion, but should not be used in patients whose peripheral circulation is impaired. Fine. If the pump is not available, what we can use is short or rapid acting insulin every 2 hourly. Fine. And it should not be used in patients whose peripheral circulation is impaired. So initial dose is what? 0.3 units per kg, followed 1 hour later by the subcutaneous insulin Lispro or Aspart at zero point 0.1 unit per kg every hour, or 0.15 to zero point 0.2 units per kg every 2 hours. If the blood glucose falls to less than 250 mg per dl before the DKA has resolved, reduce the subcutaneous insulin Lispro or Aspart to 0.05 units per kg per hour to keep the blood glucose around 200 mg per deciliter until the resolution of DKA. Coming to the potassium replacement, addition of the potassium to the IV fluids is essential in DKA to replenish the deficits in the total body potassium of about 3 to 6 milliequivalents per liter. Potassium should be added in the fluid at the rate of 40 milliequivalents per liter, ideally 50% as chloride and 50% as phosphate. 50% as chloride, that is 50% as KCl, and 50% as potassium phosphate. Once the child has passed the urine and a serum potassium level of less than 6 milliequivalents has been documented. Fine, when we have to add KCl, if the child has passed urine and the serum potassium level of less than 6 milliequivalents have been documented, then only we have to then only we have to add the KCl. Okay, if the patient is hypokalemic, potassium replacement should begin at the time of initial volume expansion, even before starting the insulin therapy. The maximum recommended rate of the IV potassium replacement is zero point 0.5 milliequivalents per kg per hour or 80 milliequivalents per IV fluid, per liter of the IV fluid. Okay, this is the maximum recommended rate of IV replacement. If hypokalemia persists despite a maximum rate of potassium replacement, then the rate of insulin infusion can be reduced. Fine. When we have to reduce the rate of insulin, if the hypokalemia persists even after the maximum rate of potassium replacement. If the patient is hyperkalemic, potassium replacement therapy is deferred until the urine output is documented. During the administration of potassium, adequate urine output is ensured and the serum potassium level and EEG are monitored frequently. Now the phosphate replacement. Total body phosphate is depleted in the decay due to the movement across the cell wall in the osmotic diuresis, but in majority of the patient this deficit spontaneously resolved. In rare patient with a serum phosphate less than 1 mg per deciliter, there is risk of rhabdomyolysis, hemolytic anemia, and adverse effect on the tissue oxygenation, and these patients need phosphate replacement. Fine, when the serum phosphate levels are less than 1 mg per deciliter. Then there is a risk of rhabdomyolysis, hemolytic anemia, and adverse effect of the tissue oxygenation. Now coming to the correction of the metabolic acidosis and the bicarbonate therapy. Acidosis in the decay responds to the fluorine and the insulin therapy, and bicarbonate administration is usually not required only. Fine. Therapy with the bicarbonate in the decay may worsen the hypokalemia, hyponatremia, and the CNS acidosis and precipitate the cerebral edema. That's why we don't normally use bicarbonate. However, bicarbonate administration in the dose of 1 to 2 milliequivalents per kg diluted in 0.45% saline over 60 minutes may be considered in children with cardiac dysfunction secondary to the profound acidosis of pH less than 6.9 and those with a life-threatening hyperkalemia. So this is the condition when bicarbonate therapy is used. When is bicarbonate therapy being used? If the pH is less than 6 and in those with the life-threatening hyperkalemia, in only these two. And in the dose of 1 to 2 milliequivalents per kg in diluted 0.545% saline over 60 minutes. Now coming to the monitoring. Appropriate management of the decay requires stringent monitoring of the patient's clinical condition and biochemical parameters on a flow chart. Table 6 mentions the important clinical signs that needs to be monitored frequently. Clinical signs need to be monitored every hour initially. General signs like heart rate, respiratory rate, blood pressure, hydration status, fluid intake, and the urine output. And the neurological signs like the sensorium using the GCS, restlessness or irritability, headache, recurrence of the vomiting, increased drowsiness, incontinence, and the cranial nerve examination for the new onset palsies or any abnormal pupillary response. Persistent tachycardia and hypotension may indicate persistent dehydration and hypovolemia. While a drop in the heart rate with a new development of hypertension may point towards the raised intracranial pressure. Fine. There are two conditions which are written. If there is persistent tachycardia, that is heart rate is increased along with hypotension, that is indicating that there is still dehydration and hypovolemia. This is the first condition. And the second one is if there is a drop in the heart rate, that there is heart rate is decreasing with but there is hypertension. It points towards what? Raised ICP as seen in the cerebral edema. So an intake output charting should be carefully done. Table 7 mentions the measured and calculated biochemical parameters to be monitored frequently in the decay. Though blood glucose level is conveniently measured frequently using a glucometer. Measured values: capillary blood glucose every 30 to 60 minutes, venous plasma glucose from the lab every 2 to 4 hours. Fine. This needs to be monitored. Electrolyte, sodium potassium chloride, ECG if the potassium is not available immediately every 2 to 4 hours. VBG needs to be done every 4 hours, every 2 to 4 hours, and blood urea. Blood urea, potassium, calcium, magnesium every 6 hours. Calculated values, there is the corrected sodium and iron gap and the calculated osmolality. Fine. Blood urea, nitrogen, calcium, chloride, this is from the table itself. The frequency of monitoring needs individualization. Yeah, we were here. Frequently used, though the blood glucose is conveniently measured frequently using a glucometer, the values must be occasionally cross-checked from the laboratory using the venous samples to ensure the accuracy. Apart from the measured values, we need to calculate certain parameters like the corrected sodium, anion gap, and the serum osmolality. Monitoring corrected serum sodium helps in assessment of the free water deficit, while declining anion gap indicates a successful therapy of the metabolic acidosis. Okay, we read the formula of right these corrected sodium and an iron gap and serum osmolality. So when corrected sodium, this helps in assessment of the water deficit, and if the iron gap is decreasing, it indicates the successful therapy. Now transition to the subcutaneous insulin. Oral feeds should be introduced only when significant clinical improvement has occurred, metabolic acidosis has resolved, though ketosis may persist, but acidosis has resolved and the patient wishes to eat. Timing of switch to subcutaneous route. The feed's time to switch the subcutaneous insulin is just before a meal. In order to allow adequate time for the subcutaneously administered insulin to begin its action, rapid-acting insulin like the Lispro or Aspart are administered subcutaneously 15 to 30 minutes prior, and regular insulin 1 to 2 hours prior to stopping the insulin infusion. With intermediate or long-acting insulin, the overlap should be longer, as long as 12 hours or more, as for the patient on a basal bolus insulin regimen. In these patients, the first dose of the basal insulin may be administered in the evening, and the regular insulin infusion is stopped the next morning. Now, coming to the dose of subcutaneous insulin. Now, let's start with the dose of subcutaneous insulin. In patients with the known diabetes, their usual insulin regimen may be restarted. Who are known diabetes, their usual insulin regimen may be restarted once the DKA is resolved. For patients with the new onset diabetes, the recommended total daily dose of the insulin for prepubertal ages who are new onset diabetes for prepubertal ages 0.75 to 1 units per kg, and for the pubertal age children it is 1 to 1.2 units per kg. Okay, this is important to remember when we are starting with the subcutaneous insulin. In prepubertal age it is 0.75 to 1, and for pubertal children 1 to 1.2 units per kg, administered as 1 to 2 dose of the ultra long acting or the basal insulin, NPS glargine or the detamir insulin, and 3 pre-meal doses of the rapid or the ultra short acting insulin, regular aspart, lispro or glulicine. Okay. Moving ahead to the frequent monitoring of the blood glucose is required before breakfast, before lunch, before dinner, and at 2 a.m. to adjust the insulin requirements, especially in the newly diagnosed children. Prevention of the complication of the therapy. How are we going to prevent the complication? Important complication of the DK have been listed in the table 8. So let's read that first. These are the complications of DKA: hypoglycemia, hypokalemia, hyperchloremic acidosis, infections, example the mucormycosis, deep vein thrombosis, renal failure, cerebral edema, intestinal necrosis, cerebral venous thrombosis, rhabdomyolysis, arrhythmia, and pulmonary edema. So these are the complications of DKA. Strategies to prevent the complication common dyselectrolemias have been discussed in the relevant sections. We are first going to read about cerebral edema. While clinically significant cerebral edema is detected only in 0.3 to 1% of the children with DKA, how much? Detected only in 0.3 to 1% children of the DKA, it is the most common cause of mortality. Over a quarter of patients with the clinically significant cerebral edema succumb, and another quarter have significant neurological morbidity. Cerebral edema was earlier thought to be a result of rapid fluid administration with abrupt changes in the serum osmolality. Recent studies indicate that the neurological injury may be caused by the factors intrinsic to DK, which might get further exacerbated during the treatment. Risk factor for the development of the cerebral edema have been elucidated in the table 9. We will read about that. Important red flag signs and the symptoms that should raise the suspicion towards the possible development of the cerebral edema include new onset headache after beginning of the treatment, a progressively worsening or severe headache, slowing of the heart rate not related to the sleep or improved intravascular volume, changes in the sensorium, specific neurological sign like the cranial nerve palsies, rising blood pressure, and the decreased oxygen saturation. So these are all the important red flags that will raise the suspicion. As these are red flags, let's mark it with the red one. This is important to read, right? Let's read it once again. So while um, treating a patient with DK, we should keep these signs and symptoms in mind to prevent cerebral edema. New onset headache after beginning of the treatment, or progressively worsening or severe headache. Fine. First was about headache. Second one, slowing of the heart rate not related to sleep. Fine. Slowing of the heart rate not related to sleep, or improved intravascular volume not related to sleep or improved intravascular volume. Okay. Changes in the sensorium, specific neurological signs, rise in blood pressure, and decrease oxygen saturation. Changes in the sensorium, specific neurological signs, blood pressure rising, and decreased oxygen saturation. We have to keep these points in mind. Saturation decreasing, heart rate slowing, BP rising. Fine, these are pointing towards the cerebral edema. The patient can go into cerebral edema. They increase the risk. In patients with the several risk factors for cerebral edema, mannitol or the hypertonic saline should be kept ready at the bedside with the dose to be given, calculated, and noted down. In case of acute deterioration of the neurologic status, they should be given immediately. Muir's criteria outlined in the table 10 help in the clinical diagnosis of the cerebral edema. The two major criteria, or one major and two minor criteria. What do we need? Either two major criteria or one major and two minor criteria. So this is the risk factors for cerebral edema in patients with the DKA. What are the risk factors for DKA cerebral edema? Intrinsic or the disease related factors. These are the intrinsic factors. First one is the age, if less than 5 years, then increased chances of cerebral edema, new onset diabetes, long duration of DKA symptoms before presenting to health facility, and severe acidosis. Fine, these are all the risk factors relating to cerebral edema. Age less than 5 years, new onset diabetes, long duration of the decay symptoms before presenting to health facility, and severe acidosis. Now coming to the treatment related risk factors. Use of bicarbonate therapy, too rapid fall of the serum osmolality, failure of the suboptimal serum sodium to rise during the treatment, higher volumes of the fluid infused in the first 4 hours, administration of the insulin within the first hour of treatment. This is very important to remember that we should not do all these. Intrinsic factors were what? Age less than 5 years, new onset diabetes, long duration of decay symptoms before presenting to the health facility, and severe acidosis. These were all the intrinsic or the disease relating factors. Now, there are certain treatment related factors also, like the use of bicarbonate, or too rapid fall in the serum osmolality, or failure of the suboptimal serum sodium to rise during the treatment, higher volumes of the fluid infused in the first 4 hours, and administration of the insulin within the first hour of treatment. Okay. Yeah, now let's continue from here. So, for the clinical diagnosis of cerebral edema, two major criteria is required, or one major criteria and two minor criteria, or in the presence of one diagnostic criteria. Have a sensitivity of 92% and a false positive rate of only 4% for diagnosing the cerebral edema. However, signs that occur before the treatment should not be considered in the diagnosis of cerebral edema. Cerebral edema usually becomes manifest 4 to 12 hours after starting the treatment. Okay, so this is the Morris criteria for the clinical diagnosis of cerebral edema, which is very important. Again, um, one major criteria and two minor criteria, or two major criteria, along with in the presence of one diagnostic criteria. So let's read first the diagnostic criteria. Abnormal motor or the verbal response to pain, decorticate or decerebrate posture, cranial nerve palsies, either third, fourth, or sixth, abnormal neurogenic respiratory pattern, like the grunting or tachypnea or Cheyne-Stokes respiration or apneosis. Fine, if there is, these were all the diagnostic criteria. First one is the abnormal motor or the verbal response to pain, decorticate or the decerebrate posture, cranial nerve palsies, and abnormal neurogenic respiratory pattern, like the grunting or the tachypnea or the Cheyne-Stokes respiration or the apneosis. Now coming to the major criteria, altered mentation, fluctuating level of consciousness, or the altered mentation is the one of the major criteria. Then sustained heart rate deceleration, decrease more than 20 beats per minute, not attributable to improved intravascular volume or sleep state. Then it is a major criteria. And age inappropriate incontinence. Now coming to the minor criteria, they include vomiting, headache, lethargy, or not easily arousable, diastolic blood pressure of more than 90 mm of Hg, and age less than 5 years. Vomiting, headache, lethargy, or not easily arousable, diastolic blood pressure more than 90 mm of Hg, and age less than 5 years. One diagnostic criteria, two major criteria, or one major criteria and two minor criteria are used for the diagnosis before therapy, or as late as 24 to 48 hours after the treatment. Now coming to the management of cerebral edema. The head end of the bed is elevated provided there is no hypotension. Fine. So how are we going to manage the cerebral edema? Firstly, the head end is elevated provided there is no hypotension. Moving ahead to the second point, the fluid administration rate is reduced by one third of the total amount calculated. Fluid administration rate is reduced by one third. The airway is secured GCS if less than 8. Airway is secured if GCS is less than 8. The patient should be intubated and mechanically ventilated. During ventilation, aggressive hypoventilation, PCO2 less than 22 mm of Hg is avoided. Aggressive hyperventilation is avoided, that is PCO2 should be less than 22 mm of Hg. Intravenous 3% saline is given at the dose of 5 to 10 ml per kg over 30 minutes. 3%, this is for 3% saline. Or mannitol is administered at the rate of zero point 0.5 to 1 gram per kg over 20 minutes. The dose is repeated if no response is perceived within 30 minutes to 2 hours. Okay, dose can be repeated if no response within 30 minutes of the 30 minutes to 2 hours. Okay. Following institution of therapy, a cranial CT may be obtained to rule out other treatable cause of the neurological deterioration, like the thrombosis or hemorrhage. So cranial CT may also be done. Now, prevention of the recurrent episodes of DKA. Management of an episode of DKA, especially in the child with a known diabetes, is incomplete until its cause has been identified and all the attempts made to rectify it. It is important to remember that the previous episode of the DKA constitute the most important risk factor for the recurrent DKA in children with the established diabetes. Fine. Infections rarely precipitate DKA in a well-controlled child with the type 1 diabetes. However, in a child with a previously uncontrolled type 1 diabetes mellitus by high HbA1c, infections can predispose to the development of DKA. In a previously diagnosed patient with a diabetes, omission of insulin, whether deliberate or accidental, underlies in majority of the cases of the DKA. Poor socioeconomic status, poor access to the healthcare, psychosocial issues, lack of the parental supervision, and eating disorders need to be identified and addressed. Lack of awareness about the sick day guidelines for the management of the type 1 diabetes mellitus, misconceptions like withholding insulin during the stress or starvation or vomiting or infections, Experimenting with the indigenous therapies and confusing honeymoon phase with the cure or recovery might also predispose to the development of the DKA and emphasize the need for the detailed counseling for the of the families and the diagnosis and the ongoing patient education activities. A written document about the sick day care should be made available to all the families, and the healthcare provider should be readily accessible in case of emergencies. Awareness among the physician is essential to allow early recognition and the management of DKA so that the prolonged hospital admission and the life-threatening complication like the cerebral edema can be avoided. Conclusions: diabetic ketoacidosis is an important cause of the morbidity and mortality in the children with the type 1 diabetes mellitus. Early diagnosis, appropriate management, stringent monitoring, and preventing the complications are critical to ensure favorable outcomes in these patients. Thank you.